You're back. We're back, and we got more history on the go for today. We're getting into a brand new series on this one, and it was the most requested one in the comments on our history videos.
Yeah.
Napoleon and the Napoleonic Wars and his journey, which there is a ton of videos on Epic History about Napoleon.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's one of those names that I feel like you hear is like this epic figure in history, but I really don't know much about him. So
no, like you said, I've heard his name before, obviously, but to be honest, I've heard I think more negative things about him.
Yeah,
people talk about him being such a demonic figure in some sense.
Yeah.
That he was, a terrorizer, a tyrant in history.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I've heard. But, after doing Alexander the Great, which was the last series that we did from Epic History, which was fantastic, right?
Yeah, that one was awesome. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, learned a lot about Alexander in that one. But you look back and you're like, wow, Alexander was really a one-of-a-kind individual, right? And as we got to know him a little bit more, we're like, wow, for the time frame and what he achieved was so significant. And I'm wondering if that's going to be somewhat similar as we learn about Napoleon.
Yeah, and we were just doing a brief little kind of overview about what to expect from this series, and it mentioned the Battle of Waterloo, and that jogged my memory because we did the song by ABBA, Waterloo,
right,
which is based on the Battle of Waterloo.
Yeah. So we're getting to his first battle here, Napoleon's first victory, the Siege of Toulon from 1793. I always want to say 19.
Time ago.
I'll keep thinking 1900s, but no, we're going way back on this one.
Way back.
Long time ago. But I'm really excited to learn about Napoleon, guys. Thank you so much for the recommendation. Thank you for supporting us. We're glad that you're coming through and enjoying these history videos with us because we've been learning a whole bunch.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And really cool to have you guys come through and leave comments and educate us even further above and beyond these videos. So without further ado, you ready to check out Napoleon?
I am. Let's do it.
Let's go.
An Epic History TV History March collaboration, supported by our sponsor, Osprey Publishing. In the summer of 1793, the French Revolution was entering its fourth year, and France was on the verge of anarchy. In Paris, political extremists had seized control of the revolution. They guillotined the king and imposed a reign of terror that dealt summary justice to all suspected enemies of the revolution.
So many heads cut off.
Hoping to unify the new republic, France's leaders had declared war on the Habsburg Empire. But the conflict quickly widened, and soon France was facing the combined might of Europe's leading powers, determined to stamp out her dangerous political experiment. Meanwhile, whole regions of France had come out in open revolt, horrified by the new extremism of the revolution. In August, the Republic suffered a further, potentially fatal blow, when the city of Toulon joined the revolt. Toulon was France's largest and most important naval base in the south, home to a third of the entire French Navy.
Wow.
But now, rebels welcomed their old enemy, the British Royal Navy, into the port, led by Admiral Lord Hood, aboard HMS Victory. It was an extraordinary coup. Without a shot being fired, the Allies had crippled French naval power in the Mediterranean and gained a vital toehold on the French coast. All French forces in the area were immediately diverted to face this new threat and lay siege to the rebel port. 19,000 troops in all. But since most French officers had been aristocrats who were now fleeing the revolution in large numbers, they were seriously short of professional leadership. Their commander, General Jean-François Carteau, was a loyal Republican, but a court painter by trade with no military training.
That's not good.
To make matters worse, one of his few professional officers, his artillery commander, Colonel Dommartin, had been badly wounded on the approach to Toulon. Antoine Salicetti, a Corsican deputy of the National Convention in Paris, recommended as his replacement a fellow countryman, a 24-year-old artillery officer who was passing Toulon en route to the front, named Napoleon Bonaparte, or Bonaparte. Bonaparte was a professional soldier, but he'd seen almost no active service. Nevertheless, Salicetti was impressed by his manner, and most of all, his politics. Bonaparte had just written a political pamphlet, a short story about a young artillery officer who berates his fellow diners for their disloyalty to the Republic. General Carteau thought it wise to accept Deputy Salicetti's recommendation.
That's pretty wild. I mean, a few points there. He was just passing through.
Yeah, it's like, what are the
Toulon.
chances that...
And he had got this recommendation based on a book that he had written, and where he carried himself at 24 years old.
Yeah.
So some similarities between Alexander and Napoleon here in that early 20s.
Yeah, young.
They're being thrust into the fold and required to take a leadership role, I assume, which is going to take place at a young, early age. Alexander, obviously, was really
younger,
young.
Yeah.
But even at 24, we think about 24 today.
Yeah.
You know,
imagine a 24-year-old like leading your military.
Right. You would think as a leading general, being like a experienced veteran that's been around the game for a long time, that's going to make these very influential decisions, and it doesn't seem like we're trending in that direction.
No, yeah, and it also, like, a lot of these people have no experience, right, as well.
That's what they were saying.
Yeah.
They didn't really have any other options.
Yeah.
That's why he was thrust into the fold.
Deputy Salicetti's recommendation. The great port of Toulon was well defended by city walls and a dozen outlying forts and redoubts. They were held by 2,000 British soldiers and sailors, 6,000 Spanish troops, 6,000 Neapolitans, and 800 Sardinians. Artillery would be the key to overcoming these formidable defences. But when Bonaparte was put in command of the artillery on the 16th of September, he found himself with few cannon, not enough trained gun crews, and a shortage of gunpowder and shot. With relentless energy and determination, Bonaparte transformed the situation, requisitioning unused guns, training infantrymen to work them, setting up a new forge and workshop, and arranging transport from Marseille of 100,000 sandbags for constructing new batteries. Through hard work, he was ultimately able to build his force up to 64 officers and 1,500 men, manning 100 cannon, howitzers, and mortars. Within days, Bonaparte had established 2 new forward batteries with good revolutionary names, La Montagne and Sans Culottes, which brought Toulon's inner harbour within range and forced Admiral Hood to move all his ships closer to the port. Bonaparte also came up with a plan, one that would allow the French to bypass most of Toulon's defences and secure the rapid victory the Republic so desperately needed. Bonaparte argued that if Fort L'Aiguillette could be captured, which looked out across the harbour, he could fill it with heavy guns and shell the British and Spanish fleet at anchor. Admiral Hood would be forced to abandon the port and take with him the Allied soldiers that Toulon relied on for its defence. General...
Very cool, because, you know, he just took advantage of the positioning to kind of keep them stuck there. They had nowhere else to go. The strength that they captured it with would be forced to vacate, and then they would be vulnerable in every other aspect. So again, we see the tactics, smart tactics to say, oh, if we can just take this positioning will allow us to seize an advantage on them.
Yeah, which is crazy, right? Because you're thinking more about, like, how can I take advantage of the situation to move them into a position that's more advantageous more advantageous for me, opposed to like, let's just go attack.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very cool because we're seeing the tactical warfare that we saw a lot of in Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
The way he, his tactics really provided him the wins in battles, because so many times in those battles we had seen that he was outnumbered.
Yeah,
very
for sure.
often.
And continuously won, even being outnumbered.
And this is similar, right? They're saying that the numbers, they don't have the equipment and numbers that they need. So how do you win? You have the tactics that you utilize to then switch the numbers into your favor in certain areas on the map. And that results in
thinking like multi-step strategic advances, opposed to just like going and attacking.
Yeah, it doesn't resolve with numbers, it resolves from tactics.
On for its defense. General Carteau saw the merits of Bonaparte's plan, and on the 22nd of September, French forces attacked Mulgrave. But to Bonaparte's exasperation, while he'd argued for an attack by 3,000 men, the indecisive Carteau committed only 400. Not only was the attack easily repulsed, but it alerted the Allies to the danger. Within 48 hours, they'd reinforced Mulgrave with thousands more troops and built a new fort named Fort Mulgrave, bristling with 20 cannon. The position was now so strong, the French nicknamed it Little Gibraltar.
No idea what that means. There's only one possible plan.
Finally, in mid-November, an experienced professional soldier arrived to take command of French forces, General Dugommier. He saw at once that Bonaparte's plan was the only way to take Toulon, and gave it his full backing.
Nice.
Bonaparte, promoted to major, got to work, overseeing construction of several more batteries in preparation for the decisive assault. One forward battery was so exposed to enemy fire that men refused to be sent there. So Bonaparte renamed it La Batterie des Hommes Sans Peur, the battery of men without fear. And suddenly, there was no shortage of volunteers. It was an early display of Napoleon's genius for inspiring his soldiers, one that would serve him well in the years ahead. On the 30th of November, the Allied Land Forces commander, British General Charles O'Hara, tried to seize back the initiative, leading an assault on the new French batteries facing Fort Malbousquet. At first, the attack was successful. The batteries were overrun, the French guns spiked. But a counterattack with much greater numbers, and led in person by General Dugommier and Major Bonaparte, drove back the Allies. General O'Hara himself was shot through the hand and captured. 12 years before, he'd surrendered to George Washington at Yorktown during the American War of Independence.
Wow.
Now he got to surrender to Napoleon Bonaparte.
Two pretty big figures. Among those who most distinguished themselves in the review, he was helped in rallying the men and women who were citizens of Bonaparte and men to.
In the early hours of the 18th of December, in howling wind and driving rain, the French launched a major assault on Fort Mulgrave. The wet conditions made muskets useless except as clubs or with bayonets. Bonaparte led the second wave in person. Amid fierce hand-to-hand fighting, his horse was killed under him, and he was bayoneted in the thigh by a British sergeant, a wound that came within inches of ending his life and radically changing the course of history. Finally, the Allied garrison was overwhelmed, and Mulgrave fell to the French. Fort Leg.
It's so crazy how he had these tactics in mind initially early on, and he had the element of surprise to his advantage, and then because he didn't get the backing of his countrymen, failed him.
Yeah.
And then that battle got so much more difficult because that element of surprise was lost. And then he had the more experienced soldier come along, the general, I think, and back his plan. And then finally they're like, okay, we're gonna give you the troops that you need, but they wouldn't have had needed to do that in the first place
if they just listened.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's just funny how the scales can tip in your influence when you have the backing of the people you need to have, and then all of a sudden people be like, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
But he needed to have that first. He had this tactical mindset seemingly from the get-go, but he almost died because he didn't get that backing.
Yeah, because they just didn't believe in it and like half committed to it.
Yeah, and then probably after this, we'll see in later battles, he'll have, that backing right
More
from
support.
the get-go because he performed so well in this one, but he had to prove himself in the Siege of Toulon first.
Yeah.
And that's what they had suggested as well by renaming the battery there. It's like that tactic itself really caused them to see, oh, that's a really smart way to get our motivation up and morale up. So he probably used that going forward. But it's really interesting to see this first experience, how it probably shaped a lot of his mindset going forward.
Yeah, it's also interesting because they had mentioned the American War of Independence and the
George Washington.
Yeah, which is, we've been watching the Benjamin Franklin series on Apple. So that would have been, I guess, like shortly before all of this. Because that was, they said about 12 years prior to this, the American Independence War was going on, which is going on in that series, right? So it's just interesting how all of these things were all going on at one time, all these big wars. And
how crazy is it that guy that, he's with George Washington one second, and then the next 12 years later, he's with Napoleon. Like, that's the story that you can write about.
Yeah,
and your
literally.
memoirs are going to want to be read for sure.
Largely influential factors.
Yeah, maybe we should look into that guy because clearly he's got an interesting life story as well.
Mulgrave fell to the French. Fort L'Aiguillette and Tour de la Balaquière were soon also in French hands. By the following afternoon, the French had 10 heavy guns in L'Aiguillette, placing the Allied ships within range. Admiral Hood could not expose his valuable ships of the line to such a threat. He had no option but to order an immediate evacuation of the fleet and garrison from Toulon. Small Spanish and British teams raced to destroy all the French ships and naval stores that they couldn't take with them. But amid the chaos of their departure, 18 ships of the line were allowed to fall back into French hands. A badly missed opportunity. Many French citizens of Toulon were desperate to escape aboard the Allied ships, knowing that the Republicans would inflict terrible reprisals on the city. British and Spanish ships took as many as they could, about 14,000 in all.
Wow.
But scores were drowned amid chaotic and desperate scenes. Others were left to face the wrath of the revolution.
Off with their head.
Republican troops entered the city the next morning, and executions and firing squads began almost immediately. For the next 2 weeks, about 200 were executed every day.
Scary
Allied
times.
propaganda later blamed Bonaparte for the atrocities, but there's no evidence he was directly involved.
Predictions were exactly fulfilled, such as the history of this event, which so greatly astonished Europe and has never been well understood.
France's young republic was now fighting back on all fronts. And with the fall of Toulon, the Allies had lost a golden opportunity, a chance to stir up further revolt, deal a lasting blow to French naval power, perhaps even overturn the revolution. But instead, the French Republic had weathered one of its greatest storms, in no small part thanks to the remarkable judgment, energy and courage of one 24-year-old artillery officer, now promoted Brigadier General in recognition of his extraordinary service at Toulon. Napoleon Bonaparte had taken his first step on the path to greatness. And for Europe, 21 years of almost constant war awaited. Our sponsor, Osprey Publishing, has nearly 200 titles on the Napoleonic.
21 years of constant war. Like, what?
Crazy. And Osprey Publishing, they've been featured in all the Epic History videos that we've done thus far, and they do a great job of providing all this information. Epic History, great channel, so shout out to them. Go check out their channel if there's other stuff that you want to look into. Just don't jump ahead on Napoleon now, because we've started the series, and we got to get you to come back and hang out with us going forward. But like you said, 21 years of war was on the horizon after this, and it's pretty wild to think about how France might have fallen if it wasn't for Napoleon.
Yeah, like he kind of came in and saved the day.
Yeah, and you think how influential the French have been for so long.
Yeah. In
so many different areas of the world. Obviously, we know Britain has been influential as well, but both of those countries have been at odds for a very, very long time. And it's just so amazing to me how certain figures arose at certain times to make such a vast difference in the outcome of the history of the world.
Yeah, and how the like one person could have changed everything, like if they didn't exist or didn't do what they did.
Yeah, and I didn't know that Spain and Britain were allied at any point. That was news to me. I didn't know that the Spaniards. I
didn't either.
And how that all came to be. I don't know how long they stay allied for, and maybe we'll find that out as we go. But
more details to come.
Yeah, that was really, really interesting. To know where his started from. And it was informative. I really, really liked that. Seeing the intricate details of the tactics.
Yeah, for sure. And definitely kind of shows, like, I like seeing where, like, the origin story almost of people, right? Because you kind of get an idea of, like, their background, where they came from and how they grew. Like, you hear about them, most people you hear about already being this, like, well-acclaimed figure, and you don't really know much about how they got to that place, so it's cool to kind of see the beginning of his story.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure we're going to dive into a little bit of the politics, because they mentioned that he was polished in terms of the political acumen. So I think I've heard that before, that he had not only military tactics as a leader, but also was negotiating between different countries and leaders
using
and stuff.
Using his political skills.
Yeah, so we'll see if that arises later on, and hopefully you guys come through and check out the next one. I think there's a whole series, as I said, about Napoleon and his battles. So
well, it looks like here there's like 3 books just on Waterloo alone.
Yeah, so we'll look at the next video in order. I don't know what that's going to be at this current moment, but you guys can add that down below. Any insights you want to add in terms of what we talked about and discussed in this video?
We'd love to learn, so share all the details with us.
Yeah, we love the information. So hit that like button if you enjoyed this one. Leave us a comment, subscribe, and be on the lookout for our next version of Napoleon, or our next episode of Napoleon, which will be a week from now. Other than that, have a great day. We'll see you then.
Thanks for watching, guys. See you then.